A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go on a camping trip to Yellowstone National Park. We had been camping many times before, but never in a place as big as Yellowstone. We planned a week of adventures, exploring the great outdoors. The first few days were easy, with beautiful sights to see and fun nights around the campfire. But we also left room for spontaneity, going wherever we wanted. On the last night, however, things got tense. It was late, it was dark, and we couldn't find a place to camp. Every campsite we passed was full, until we found an empty parking lot with a few fire pits made of rocks. It didn't appear on the map as an official campsite, but it looked like other people had camped there before. So we set up our tent in the dark and went to bed early, since we were very tired. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by my friends. They whispered that something was wrong. When I listened closely, I immediately understood why. Strange bird sounds were coming from the surrounding forest. It was too early for birds to be singing, and the worst part was that there were so many sounds coming from different directions. We were all very scared. We decided to leave the tent without making a sound and gathered next to the car, waiting for our eyes to adjust to the darkness. The sounds of the birds seemed to be getting closer, but suddenly, everything went silent. That's when we realized this wasn't normal. These weren't birds. They sounded more like people communicating in some strange way. We looked at each other and, without saying anything, decided that the best thing to do was to get in the car. As we struggled to start the car and turn on the headlights, we saw something at the edge of the forest, two people running towards us. They looked human, but they were so dirty and wild that it was hard to be sure. We didn't wait to find out who they were. We got out of there as quickly as we could. As we fled, we saw three more figures on the other side of the forest. We drove all night without stopping until we got out of the park. We abandoned our tent, but fortunately we had already put our belongings in the car. After that, we decided to cut the trip short and spend the last night in a hotel. And look, we never camped together again after that scary night. My college friends and I have always tried to stay in touch even after we graduated. One way we did this was to take a week off in the summer or fall to go camping together. Last year, we decided to go camping in the mountains of Colorado at the end of the summer. As soon as we arrived, we rented a car and drove up into the mountains. The second night, we found a really cool place to camp. Each lot was far enough apart that it felt like we were alone in the middle of the woods, surrounded by trees. We picked a spot near a creek so we could wash off after a long day of hiking. We set up camp before dark and then went out to a nearby town for dinner. When we got back, it was already dark, and we noticed that the flap of our tent was open. Someone had gone through our stuff. There was no one around, which freaked us out a little, but we decided to go ahead. Later, we grabbed our towels and shampoo and headed to the creek to wash off. The water was cold, but it was refreshing after a tiring day. It was only when we were drying off that I realized. On the other side of the stream, someone was watching us. Not wanting to alarm my friends, I suggested that we go back to camp. On the way, I told them what I had seen, and we decided to sleep in the car because between the person watching and the stranger who had messed with the tent, no one felt safe. The night was tense. I stayed awake, peering out the window, trying to see if anyone else was approaching. At one point, I saw something horrible. Someone was crouched in front of our tent, slowly unzipping it. When the person saw that there was no one inside, he turned towards the car and began to calmly approach. In desperation, I woke my friends and honked as loudly as I could. The person, instead of running away, simply got up and walked away into the forest, as if he had not been caught red-handed. We stayed up the rest of the night, paranoid, waiting for her to come back, but thankfully, nothing else happened. We planned to stay there another night, but after that, we changed our minds and went to another campsite. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but that night, I'll never forget it. A long time ago, I used to go camping alone in California. When I was younger, I loved spending weekends in nature to relax. I would go on these trips almost every weekend, but I didn't really like sleeping on the ground in a tent. So I decided to buy a small camper that I could put in the back of my truck. It was super comfortable and, if needed, it could fit another person. One day, I left home and drove about 5 hours to a beautiful place that I had never been before. I spent the day hiking a long trail and then cooled off in a quiet lake. When night fell, I parked my truck in a very secluded area, almost at the top of a mountain. I planned to wake up to an incredible view the next morning. That night, I was lying in bed in the camper, reading with a flashlight, when I heard footsteps outside. Someone was approaching my truck. I thought it was strange, because usually no one comes around when I'm camping like this. Maybe I had parked in the wrong place, I thought. I felt uncomfortable, so I called out, "Who's there?" A husky male voice answered, "Hi, I just wanted to check out your trailer. It's really cool." I was comfortable in my bed and told him that he could see the trailer in the morning, thinking that maybe he was camping nearby. But he didn't answer. The silence was strange. After a few minutes, I heard him mumbling something, but I couldn't make it out. I thought he had left, so I went back to reading. But strangely, I didn't hear any footsteps leaving. Then I started hearing the footsteps again, this time moving around my truck. I looked out the small window of the trailer, but I couldn't see anything. Suddenly, I heard a knocking on the hood of my truck, which got closer and closer. Someone was climbing on top of my truck and crawling towards the trailer. That pissed me off. I took great care of my truck, and this guy was testing my patience. So I yelled that I had a gun and that if he didn't get out of my truck, I would come out with it. He got out of the truck and walked away a little, but again, I didn't hear him actually walk away. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside with the gun. When I shined it around me, I saw the man crouched near a bush about 40 feet away. When the light hit him, he retreated into the darkness. I had had enough. I yelled at him to get out and never come back. He finally disappeared into the woods. I decided I had better pack up and head home. I didn't want to risk spending the rest of the night there. Since then, I always bring my gun with me when I go camping, whether it's because of scary encounters like this or to protect myself from animals. That night, I was relieved to have my gun with me. My family has a cabin on a lake, and we go there about once a month. We are a big family, and we always end up bringing friends or special people with us. Since the cabin is small, there isn't always room for everyone to sleep inside. So, usually the younger ones, like me and my brothers, set up a tent outside to sleep. The best place to put the tent is on the sandy beach, right next to the water. The sand is soft and comfortable, much better than the hard backyard. One weekend in late July, the cabin was full of people. It was a beautiful night, and 4 of us decided to sleep in the tent. It was me, my older brother and his girlfriend, and my younger brother. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by the sound of a boat engine on the lake. Sometimes fishermen go out at night because there is not as much movement of jet skis and other boats, but they never go near anyone's property. Only this time, the sound of the engine was coming closer to our beach, where the tent was. My older brother was also woken up by the noise, so the 2 of us went out to see what was going on. We walked to the dock and saw a fishing boat slowly approaching, about 5 or 6 meters away. The moonlight revealed that the boat was empty. We stood there, staring blankly as the boat drifted toward the neighboring beach, carried by the waves. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the barking of the neighbor's dog, and soon our dogs began barking too. We ran back along the beach, almost up the hill to the cabin, when a figure emerged from the darkness, coming from the neighbor's yard. The person was dressed in a black wetsuit and wearing a mask with goggles. Our cabin and the neighbors are very close together. The figure ran past us about 30 meters away, got into the boat, and sailed away across the lake. They still looked at us as they walked away. The next day, we discovered that the neighbor's cabin had been broken into, but his dog scared the person away before he could take anything. It was a scary experience, especially since we were camping right in the middle of everything. Seeing the empty boat and the person running away in the darkness was pretty creepy. I don't think the person in the wetsuit knew we were camping on the beach. If he had, he probably wouldn't have come so close with the boat. We still go to the cabin a lot, but we've never seen that boat or the person in the wetsuit again. Even so, our parents love to tell this story in a scary way to give us butterflies before we go to sleep in the tent. Many years ago, a friend and I decided to go on a bike trip together. Our plan was to ride most of the day on trails and then find a place to camp at night. The trip went pretty smoothly, and after about 2.5 days, we arrived at our destination. It was a nice little town, and we decided to spend the rest of the day there, swimming in the lake and finally eating something decent at a restaurant. After all that time eating nothing but beans and bread, It felt like a feast. However, during the trip, we had some trouble finding good places to camp. Many times, we ended up sleeping on the edges of parks or even in the back of cemeteries. One of those nights, we found a really quiet spot in the back of a cemetery. It was out of sight of the main road and had a nice mulch area, which was perfect for pitching our tent. That night, which happened to be the eve of the 4th of July, we sat outside the tent to watch the fireworks that some people were setting off. The sun had already set, and while we were there, we started to notice some strange movements. You know when you think you see something moving out of the corner of your eye, but when you really look, there's nothing there? It happened several times. Since we had camped in cemeteries before, and we even found it interesting to walk around and read the tombstones to pass the time, we decided to grab a flashlight and take a walk. During our walk, we came across a tombstone that made us sad. It was the grave of a baby, with several toy cars around it. The scene was so sad that, for a moment, the wind turned cold and the mood changed completely. Then, in the distance, we saw something that gave us goosebumps. A small figure, the size of a child, gliding across the road. It appeared for a few seconds, and then simply disappeared. Completely frightened, we ran back to the tent. That was a difficult night. We slept badly and woke up several times. When the sun finally started to rise, we felt relieved and started packing our things to leave. I was about to leave the tent when I saw something on the ground. Right at the entrance, there were 2 toy cars, just like the ones we had seen at the baby's grave the night before. My friend and I swore that neither of us had gotten up during the night to touch them. We grabbed the cars and went to return them to the grave. When we got there, we noticed that there were 2 empty spaces where the cars had been. We finished packing up our things and left the cemetery as quickly as we could. Before this trip, I had never believed in ghosts or spirits. But after that night, I began to see things differently. Something was there with us that night, something I will never forget.